Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2016 National Adoption Month webinar. I would like to take a few moments to explain the audio and video capabilities of this webinar. Please note that this call is being recorded. If you do object to recording, please disconnect now. All lines are in a listen-only mode. If at any time you should require operator assistance, please press *0. There will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions of the panelists at the end of the webinar. You can ask a question using the questions feature in the GoToWebinar control panel at the top right corner of your screen. Please feel free to use the questions features at any time throughout the webinar, as the questions will be collected for the Q&A session. A recording of this webinar will be available on the National Adoption Month website in a few weeks. Now I'll turn the meeting over to June Dorn from the Children's Bureau. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm June Dorn, the National Adoption Specialist with the Children's Bureau, and I would like to welcome everyone to our 2016 National Adoption Month webinar, which is titled, We Never Outgrow the Need for Family. Just Ask Us. Our theme for National Adoption Month this year continues our focus from last year on the need for adoptive homes for older teens and youth. And in the webinar today, you will have the opportunity to hear from some young adults and an adoptive parent about the importance of family at any age. There are over 20,000 youth that age out of the foster care system every year, and this is a statistic that we would like to drastically reduce. All youth need attachment with family, and we hope you will appreciate the importance of that message in our webinar today. I want to thank everyone participating in this webinar today and trust you will find this experience enriching. Now, I would like to introduce Kelly Cantor of the Child Welfare Information Gateway and turn this over to her.
Thanks so much, June. Hi, everyone. Happy fall. My name is Kelly Cantor, and as June said, I am the Adoption Program Manager at Child Welfare Information Gateway, and I'm happy to be your moderator for today's webinar. I wanted to quickly review our agenda for today. June provided us with an overview of this year's National Adoption Month theme. Next, I will introduce our 4 presenters. Each presenter was selected based on the unique perspective and experience they bring about how to more effectively engage older youth in conversations about adoption. Then Alicia Groh from AdoptUSKids and I will highlight a few of the new National Adoption Month resources that are available this year. And finally, we have saved time at the end for the audience to ask questions of the presenters. Feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we will address them then. Okay, now to introduce our presenters. You should have all received full biographies this morning along with our PowerPoint, but I'm going to review some of the key highlights now.
A photo of Thomas smiling. A photo of Ashley smiling.
Thomas McBray Jr. and Ashley Garcia will bring us the young adult perspective. Thomas was adopted from foster care at the age of 17 and is currently enrolled at the University of Maryland School of Social Work.
Thomas is a case manager in Philadelphia.
Ashley Garcia was adopted from foster care at the age of 15 and is currently enrolled at Central Piedmont Community College to study social work. Our next presenter is Stacy Hudson Padova. Stacy and her husband have been foster parents in Alexandria, Virginia for 5 years. She adopted her son, Jose, from foster care when he was 18 years old. You can see a picture there of Stacy with her son doing the Tough Mudder. And our final presenter is Ani Keene.
A photo of Ani speaking at a podium.
Ani works with You Gotta Believe in New York City, an agency that focuses on finding permanent families for older youth in foster care. And she is the director of the Nobody Ages Out youth movement.
Ani is a foster care alumna who chose to be adopted at the age of 24.
So with that, we will get started. So our discussion with Thomas and Ashley will be based around 4 key questions that we felt were important for professionals who work with older youth to consider. Okay, Thomas and Ashley, are you ready?
Yes.
Great. So the first question gets at a common concern many workers have. We know some youth in foster care may be resistant to the idea of adoption. So how do you think workers should bring up the topic of adoption? Thomas, let's start with you.
Hello, everybody. I think that when the topic of adoption comes up, I think it should be natural, something that, is held with high standards, but also sensitivity with understanding that this is a child's first chance or first opportunity being introduced to what adoption is. Not every child is familiar with adoption. They have maybe somewhat of an understanding of what adoption may be based off things that they might have heard. But I think that when introducing a child to the idea of adoption, it should just be brought up in, a very serious but also calming setting, and just very natural, not really forcing it on them, not making them feel pressured to agree at that moment, but just opening the minds of, the idea of having a family that will take you in as their own.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. What about you, Ashley? What would you say is important for workers to understand about how to bring up the topic of adoption?
I believe that a social worker should have a serious conversation, but also a loving conversation about the adoption. Also, I believe it's best that they should have the discussion outside of the office and the foster home, just to have a relaxed environment to have a serious conversation. So I advise maybe to go out for ice cream or for lunch, just to make it a natural conversation. While having the discussion, they should mention what are the kids' goals, what type of family do they want, do they even want to go to college, or what is their career choice. In my experience, my social worker never asked me those questions. She just simply said, well, you're getting adopted, and she didn't really specify what that adoption word meant, if it was permanent or not permanent. So I definitely believe that the conversation should be natural.
That's excellent, Ashley. Thanks. You mentioned, your worker didn't explain what adoption meant. What would you say would have resonated with you if they were explaining what it means? What do you think is important to mention in that? I just wanted you to respond to that a little bit if you could.
Yeah, they should explain that adoption is about permanency. It's not about you moving around from foster home to foster home anymore. It's about you actually finally meeting the forever home that you would want to live in.
Yeah, and even like we say on the screen there, not assuming that a young person knows what that means, but being able to explain that, I think, is really important. Thanks so much, you both. So let's move to the second question. What do you think works well when having conversations with youth about their options, specifically whether or not they are open to adoption? Thomas, let's start with you again.
Yeah, understanding the fears of, the fears of being adopted. I know that when I was in care and when adoption was being brought up to me, one of my biggest fears was losing some of the connections that I made, whether it was my social worker, my guardian ad litem, my therapist. I was fearful that I would lose those services and lose those deep relationships that I connected, because those folks that, those that I just named in those positions, they helped me a lot to grow up. And like I was adopted at the age of 17, and I came into the system at age 11. So I was very fearful of losing those, strong supporting cast that had been there since day one, and that has watched me grow, from the moment I came into the moment I was adopted. And I just didn't want to, feel like those important people were being cut off. And I feel like maybe that's the same for youth that are in care now. They don't want to lose, their biological family. They don't want to feel like, oh, I'm going to lose my friends. So just understanding the fears that, youth that are in care now may have when a conversation of adoption comes up.
Right, and being able to explain that adoption doesn't mean being cut off from other important relationships and people in your life. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. What about you, Ashley?
Like I said before, the social worker should definitely explain what permanency means at this point on their life. That is no longer them from moving from foster home to foster home. It is about finding a loving forever home, and explaining that a loving forever home is a place that you can come off to college and visit them during the holidays and summers, and let them be aware that families that want to adopt are the ones that care the most. Also, social workers should clearly explain that the youth's options to talk with them about the pros and cons they're going to face in life now, and also explain what happens if you age out of the system, if you choose not to get adopted. And finally, make sure that they have connections they seek advice from, because in my experience, my social worker gave me options, but she didn't really clearly explain what would happen, like what were my pros and cons, and I would have loved to hear the pros and cons. So I was lucky enough to have a therapist that listed out my pros and cons.
The final key point is connect youth with young adults who are adopted from foster care so they can learn from their peers.
And we have a lot of professionals that are on the call right now. Do you have specific examples of what some of those pros and cons are, Ashley?
Basically explaining like the outcomes if you choose either to stay in the system and age out, or if you want to proceed in getting adopted, what will be your benefit in getting adopted.
Right, or if your plans are to go to school, or your plans are to work, and what that would mean. Great, thank you. I think that's really helpful for people to think through. Okay, so for the next question, we talked about what does work well. What do you think doesn't work well, or what do you think workers should avoid doing when talking to older youth about permanency and about adoption? Thomas, what about you?
Fortunate, as mentioned earlier, in the first question that was asked, it's very intimidating when you're first coming into the system, and we know that for most youth, and like myself, I know that I wanted a family, but in my early years into the system, I didn't know exactly how I wanted to go about getting a family, or what the expectations was, because I was still filling out what exactly was being in foster care and what that meant. And I just didn't want, my workers to bring up the conversation and say, this is the only option that you have, and, just make me feel so much pressure to make a decision at that moment, but gradually bring me along. And like Ashley mentioned, take me out and have those conversations that were in places that didn't seem so serious. And, after a while, give me some comfortability with, understanding that, maybe I do want to consider adoption after, the countless conversations that we've had. I'm a little bit more open-minded to it now that you didn't force it on me when you first brought it up. So just being very patient and not pressuring me to make a decision when you first bring up the topic of adoption.
And you mentioned, Thomas, in conversations, it's important to not paint the picture that adoption is perfect. What do you mean by that? Now that you are, you were adopted, or you are adopted, and you have a forever family, what would you say is important to understand, for young people to understand about what it means to be adopted and be a part of a family?
So, I learned, and just, watching shows and listening to my friends and and they go through problems with their families, is that a lot of times when we're in care, and I know when I was in care, it was so much easier to run away from problems and run away from conflicts with foster parents or resource parents. If there was a disagreement, it was easier to call my social worker and say, oh, I'm not really feeling, this home, so I kind of want to leave. But when you're adopted, it's like, it's not going to be a perfect place. You're going to have to learn to accept that every member of your family is different. Your siblings may get on your nerves sometimes, but, no home and no family is perfect. You're going to find problems, and you're going to find things that you go through. It's just being able to understand that even in your imperfections, you'll still be loved and cared for, because this family decided to take you into their home and love you as if, the mom birthed you and the father raised you. So, just understanding that not everything and not everyone is perfect, but the love will always remain the same,
Right. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect to be good. Great. Is there anything you wanted to add, Ashley, to that, about what workers should avoid doing?
I definitely agree with Thomas that social workers shouldn't force a conversation. They should, let it happen naturally. But because my former foster sister, when her first adoption was happening, her social worker didn't clearly explain to her what the process would be, and didn't really ask her the questions as like, what do you want, like what family do you want to live with? And so that adoption fell through because the conversation wasn't natural. It was being forced upon her because she was already aging out. So I definitely agree with Thomas that it shouldn't be forced and there shouldn't be any pressure.
Great, thanks. So we're at our final question. I'd like you both to think back to when you were a teenager in foster care before being adopted, and to think about what do you think are the most important things for youth to understand about what it's like to be an adult and why family is important. Thomas, what about you?
I know, Kelly, when we spoke a couple times, I had mentioned that growing up, I wasn't really in a family, and the only family that I knew was what I had seen on TV, where I was watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, The Cosby Shows, those sitcoms that had family dynamic, or even Friends that became family. I knew that that's what I wanted. That was important to me, to have that support and to have that long-lasting love and that bond where I would be accepted, and I would be supported, whether I wanted to, become a basketball player or chase a dream that seemed unattainable and unreachable. Just having somebody that was there to make me believe that I can do it, even if it takes years to get there, just believing in me. And looking back at where I was when I was younger and now, being an adult and looking at my friends who have become some of my, closest family members, I just understand that sometimes it's just a struggle. Had I not had the friends or family, I would have been struggling, making it this far, whether it was financial support or just being able to call somebody in the middle of the night because I needed some advice. I don't think that I would have been able to make it this far had I not had those long-lasting connections and those people who believed in me.
Thanks, Thomas. What do you want to add to that, Ashley?
I definitely agree that you should understand that it's almost impossible to make it out in the real world without emotional help and even financial help, especially if you're planning to go to college or you want to age out of the system. Like, you're definitely going to need that emotional help and financial help. Just last year, I took a gap year to volunteer for a program called AmeriCorps, and it was underneath a program called City Year. And if you guys don't know what AmeriCorps is the domestic version of Peace Corps. So I had to live on my own. I lived in South Carolina. I had to pay my own rent. And this was like 2.5 hours away from my mom. So every time that I would go see her, she would stock me up on things that I needed because she knew that I needed that financial help. I wasn't able to pay everything because I was under like an allowance. I was volunteering for 50 hours a week. And so she would also not only give me the things I needed, but she would give me the constant love. And that, honestly, that's all I needed. I needed the emotional attachment to her because I was, dealing with being on my own for the first time. So it is, in my preference, I think it's impossible to make it out on your own. You definitely need help.
I think that that's really powerful, Ashley. I love that story. Thank you both for sharing. I'm sure our audience will have more questions, and I know they're already coming in for you at the end. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, who will share a little about herself and what advice she has for caseworkers from her perspective as an adoptive parent. Stacy?
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for all that you do. A little bit more about myself and the picture on the screen that you see now. That's our family, Jose, my adopted son, which you guys have already heard about, and myself, my husband, Fulvio, which you'll hear me refer to, our dog, Tonka, and my stepdaughter, Hannah, who is Fulvio's daughter from his first marriage. I actually married late at the age of 38 to Fulvio when Hannah was 8 years old. So after several losses and miscarries, I realized that I couldn't have children, and I was well into my 40s, and we really wanted to have a larger family. So when we first thought of adopting, we were looking at younger children, as most people do, because we thought our daughter Hannah wanted to be the older sister. Well, we ended up fostering, and it actually was the best thing that happened to us. We brought an older boy into our home and realized that Hannah really loved being a younger sister. So that opened up many windows for us. With the time that I have with you today, there are just a few points I'd like to make. The first is many of you that with me, we really bring human personality into the family. Being older, Fulvio and I didn't want to start our career lifestyle, so things don't require diaper changes and they don't require boosters, and it was really something.
Stacey, I'm sorry. It's kind of cutting in and out. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yes. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. No, that's okay. Thank you. So these things coming in, we've just been able to...
I'm sorry. Pardon the interruption, Stacey. Your line is still cutting out.
That's better. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So we were able to do the activities with teens, such as the Tough Mudder that you all saw. We go on skiing trips. It's just been really fun, that interaction. One foster son, we have lots of interesting dinner conversations, and he stated how he was surprised that the conversation started at dinner. We all try to make a habit of all having dinner together, and he goes, it's unusual that a dinner conversation will start with zombies and end up talking about political candidates. And while some of us might think that those are one and the same, the conversation really took many different turns. We were talking about outer space, whatever. So it's just really interesting. Second, I've heard from many youth in doing these talks and presenting at Pride classes and doing things that children in foster care really think that they have to have hope for everyone, including their caseworker, when it comes to adoption. And one thing that I've heard time and time again is that they really don't want caseworkers to give up on them. They know there are success stories out there, and they want to be one of them. When we met Jose at a match party, he was very reserved and uninterested, and come to find out later, he had just been returned from a placement, and he had lost all hope of ever being adopted. This was at the age of 16. So, and we met him at 17. I just remember conversations with his caseworker, who I think was even more shocked than Jose that there was actually potential placement with us. And that just really made me surprised and sad at the time, because I didn't realize what a rarity it was to adopt a teen. But my dad's 90, my mom's 80, and really I'm so close to them still, and Jose sees that relationship. And as I tell him, you're never too old to have a family. I'm close on both sides. We're close, very close with our kids. We're very close with our parents, and you just realize that family unit continues and grows with everything. With this said, young adults' response to the idea of adoption will depend really on them and their experiences. As you just heard me talk about Jose, I think he had given up all hope and was kind of just thinking that was it for him. Whereas, when I've spoken with Thomas before in the past, he really advocated for his adoption. So I really think that, like you've heard from Thomas and Ashley, every youth and every child is different, and really just talk with them about it. Because quite honestly, they deserve to make choices, and having that family in their life should be one of them. It's amazing how many foster children we've had in our home who struggle with making choices because they've never had the opportunity to do so. Maybe they've come into foster care really young and been told, okay, this is this is X, Y, and Z of what you're going to do, what you're going to eat, where you have to be. And I know a few that have come into our house struggled with even making a decision on what they wanted to drink for dinner. So I really feel like we need to give these young adults choices so that they start making good ones, and the choice of a family really needs to be one of them for them. And my last point, but not the least point, is something that my mom told me a long time ago, is that children are meant to be unfolded and not molded. And my husband and I have definitely really learned what this has come to mean with the children that we've had in our house. They were really here to help mentor them and help them become the person they hope to be, and providing resources and love and support to get them to that place. You know, so far since Jose has come into our home, he's graduated high school, which he never thought he would do. He recently became a U.S. citizen, which we're very proud about, just happened this summer. And while community college wasn't the right fit for him, he now has a full-time job, and he's living at home, but we're looking and working with him on the next step of, okay, so what do you want to do, and where do you want to see yourself in life? And that's just, I know every day we support him with that, and I think that's very important in what we do and what you do as caseworkers, is just to help them continue to do that. So that is my points that I'd like to make today, and again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you for sharing with us. And, you know, you were kind of cutting out there, but one of your points, you know, is youth may feel like they have to have hope for everyone. And I love your story about how important it is for, as professionals and as workers, us to continue to have hope and to believe that there's a family out there for every youth and young adult, no matter how, you know, no matter what age. So I think your story is really powerful, and I know that we've gotten a couple questions for you as well. But we are now going to hear from our last, but not least, final presenter, Ani Keene, who works with You Gotta Believe and is a fierce advocate for older youth permanency. Ani, take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ani Keene. I'm the director of the Nobody Ages Our Youth movement. I entered into foster care for the first time at 17 years old, and I was legally adopted at the age of 24. So I just want to share some suggestions that I have while working with youth. The first thing I would like to mention is that when I work with youth, I let them know that I work in partnership with them. I really don't stress like on my title at all, but really upon the relationship and letting them know what it is that I'm there to do with them. And I'll let them know off jump that, you know, they are my, like, I work for them. They know right off the gate that I work for them and what my goal is, which is to find them a forever family, or if they don't want a family, or a place where they can go after 21, they can go to where they feel safe, and that person will be unconditionally committed to them. And so I let them know that. And, you know, one of the things that I think is really important for all workers is to believe that it's possible for older youth to find a family. And once, you know, workers believe it, the conversation will then become easier. So my second bullet says, you know, don't be afraid to ask these questions to get to know them. It's really important. One of the, you know, people always come up to me and ask me, you know, how do you do what you do? How do you do it? How do you have that conversation? And I have that conversation with the youth by asking them, you know, what do they like to do in their free time? If they're in sports, I ask them, you know, can I go watch their games? Whatever activities or whatever things that they do that's enjoyable, I ask if I can join them. And then, you know, depending on what they say, most of them say yes. If they say no, I want to ask them, you know, who goes to your basketball games, or who goes to see you, or who do you go with, who is around you, where you go AWOL. And I really let them know that I want to know these things simply because we want to encourage people to come forward to learn about what it would take to parent an older youth in care. And they are so much more open and more willing to give information if I let them know that I'm definitely working in partnership with them, and the people that they tell me about, that I will call them to invite them for a learning experience. I'll tell the youth that I will never call a person and say, hey, do you want to adopt this youth, or hey, can this person live with you? But instead, I have the conversation and say, hey, would you like to come and learn about what it would be like to take care of a youth in care? Would you like to come and learn about what it is that I'm doing? And from that, then they share a lot of information with me. Another thing that I really do stress is, some workers are afraid to ask questions about where the youth goes AWOL. Some of them are nervous about re-traumatizing the child, so it's uncomfortable, with going back and bringing up past relationships, people the youth might have missed. But I think that it's more traumatizing if we don't find them a family. So I think it's extremely important that we, as workers, moving forward, that we ask those challenging and uncomfortable questions for better outcomes for the youth. Workers need to engage and encourage all parties who are interested in being part of the youth life. Is extremely important. There's so many stories where people have stated to me that they came forward and they were shunned or not encouraged, or just nobody called to follow up. And usually when I go back to the work and I said, hey, I have this cousin that stated that, she met with you last year and she would like to move forward, and there was no follow-up. Can we engage this person now? And then, some of the responses was, they're too young, they're too this, the attitude, why they're coming in now, how come they didn't come 3 years ago? And so many things that came up. And my response to that is, she's here now. So what can we do to engage and encourage her now, right? Another example that I would like to share is that I got a referral of a young man who was 17 years old who came into care at birth. And, they did everything that they could possibly do to find him a adoptive family with strangers. So they put his picture out. They had meetings about him. They shared his story with families, foster families, prospective adoptive families, and there was nothing happening. So then the case was referred to You Gotta Believe. And when I went to go meet with the young gentleman, the first thing I asked the young gentleman was, who do you miss? Who would you like to see that you haven't seen in a while? He said, I would want to see my mother. I haven't seen my mother in years, and I want to see how she's doing. And I said, wow, tell me something that you remember about her, or tell me something that you really like doing with her. And within that conversation, I was able to take notes. After that, I was able to get in contact with his mother. Now, the reason why people didn't encourage or engage the mom was because the mom had mental health issues and suffers from substance abuse. But I was still able to meet with mom, who then led me to her biological mother, who then led me to her brother. So I was able to meet with grandma and meet with uncle, have uncle and wife who are stable. They are not on drugs. They work full-time and are really good people to come to the classes to learn about the experience. And once they decided something that they want to do, then they got certified. So encouraging all people is extremely important, because they may not be the one to plan for that child, but they can help lead. One last final point is to be honest and forthcoming about independent living, right? People say, independent living, you'll get your apartment. But the sad story is that there are limited to no apartments left for the youth aging out of care. And it's really not true that people live independently. In fact, people live interdependently and count on one another for emotional support or financial support. So I have a breakdown sheet. So I ask them about their goals. What do they want to do in life? And I write it as doing it alone, and then the other column is doing it with help. And so I break it down, and And when I break it down, they see that if they have help, life can be a lot easier, and they are more willing and able to have that conversation about people who they trust and people who they love, or people places where they go where they feel safe. And that is my time.
Thanks so much, Ani. Just really briefly, do you want to speak to, we added the Asking the Right Questions document as a handout. Do you want to just briefly explain what that is?
Yes, so the handout Asking the Right Questions is just sample questions that we give to everybody that we work with, and just to have that conversation with youth. Oftentimes, people say, do you want to be adopted? And the youth will say no, and it's passed along. But if we ask those questions, like, hey, your birthday is coming up, who would you like to call you? Or who would like to see if there was like a celebration or a birthday party? So they're just suggested questions for workers to ask the youth so they can have a conversation about people that's important to them. And then we as workers can follow up with those people to see what they are able or willing to do. So that's a list I think is extremely important. If you read it, it can be helpful with furthering the conversation about family.
Excellent. Thanks, Ani. And just for the audience, you can find that in the right side column along with the webinar slides and the presenter biographies in the right-hand column of your control panel.
The webinar interface was a feature for the day of the webinar, and it is no longer available.
So thanks again, Ani. I feel like you shared really tangible tips that we could potentially integrate into our own work with older youth. So before we get to our Q&A session with our presenters, we just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of the helpful resources that are available to you during this year's National Adoption Month. So on your screen, you will see the new National Adoption Month homepage. It was just launched last week, so please go check it out at www.childwelfare.gov/topics/adoption/NAM. On this year's site, you can find specific resources on how to more effectively engage older youth in conversations about adoption, as well as tools for supporting families who may adopt older youth. We are also featuring podcasts and videos this year that share the personal, behind-the-scenes story of adoption, all of which involve older youth. Please watch and share these stories, as they can be a powerful tool to begin conversations. Next is an example of an internal page on the National Adoption Month website. This year we broke down our featured resources into subtopics so you can more quickly and easily find the information you are looking for. You will also notice a new feature this year in the right side column, a tip box titled, "What Can I Do Now?" These tip boxes are intended for those of you who only have a few minutes, which is many of you, if not all, and want to find quick tips on ways you can improve your practice now. And finally, I want to highlight our new tip sheet, Talking with Older Youth About Adoption. The creation of this tip sheet was born out of multiple conversations with professionals like you. It is a downloadable PDF that is available on the National Adoption Month website, and we will also send it out to the registered participants after this webinar. It is intended to serve as a quick guide on how to have more meaningful and effective conversations with older youth. It includes key considerations and examples of possible questions or topics for you to use in your work. So now I will turn it over to Alicia Grow from AdoptUSKids, who will highlight a few things that are happening with her agency.
The AdoptUSKids website is www.adoptuskids.org.
Thanks, Kelly. Well, thanks, everyone. And I know you're probably as excited as I am hearing all of the great ideas and insights that we've heard so far today. And as Kelly mentioned, we're also excited about the resources that are available, both from the National Adoption Month website and from AdoptUSKids. So I want to highlight just a few of these resources briefly, and hope you'll go explore a little more and see how these can help support you in your work in finding families for older youth. So as you may know, AdoptUSKids has a national photo listing that is a really powerful tool for finding families for youth in foster care, including older youth. There are more than 5,000 children who are registered on the photo listing who are available for adoption. And in terms of looking for families for older youth, we have approximately 2,500 families who are approved to adopt, who are registered on the photo listing. And workers can go in and actually search for families who will be a match for children on your caseload. So even if you haven't photo listed a child or an older youth, you can look for a match using our Find a Family tool. That way it lets you search by characteristics and needs to find a family who might match with children you're looking for to find a family. So it's a great tool for doing that search for families who know that they are interested in older youth especially. Additionally, within AdoptUSKids, we operate the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment as part of AdoptUSKids, and there's a separate website, nrcdr.org. And on that website, we have extensive resources and ideas from the field for recruiting and developing and supporting foster, adoptive, and kinship families for youth in care. And we include a lot of information around recruiting families for older youth in particular. As you'll see on your screen, we've listed a few of our specific resources that might be helpful for you as you look at how to recruit and prepare and support families for older youth. We have other ideas from the field and other tools that will probably be helpful, but some that I want to specifically highlight.
The full titles of the publications are Using Integrated Recruitment and Support to Build a Strong Pool of Foster, Adoptive, and Kinship Families. Going Beyond Recruitment for Older Youth, Increasing Your System's Capacity to Respond to Prospective Parents and Prepare Older Youth for Adoption. DataDriven Recruitment, Key Data Elements on Foster and Adoptive Families.
First is our customizable Diligent Recruitment Navigator that provides a discussion question. It can serve as a discussion guide for child welfare systems as you plan your efforts to really have a data-driven approach to recruiting families for the pool of children in foster care in your area. We also have a publication that highlights the idea of using integrated recruitment and support as part of your approach to building your pool of families for children so that you are developing and supporting families from that first point of inquiry, and you're using the information you hear from families about their support needs to inform your ongoing recruitment messages. We also have a publication that's particularly relevant for this focus on older youth called Going Beyond Recruitment for Older Youth. And that looks at how you can build in key support and messaging and information into your response system and family preparation and support so that families really are equipped to meet the needs of older youth who are waiting to be adopted. The final publication I want to highlight here is our Data-Driven Recruitment publication. We believe that it's incredibly important to be data-driven so that you know how many youth in care are of certain ages, have certain needs, etc., so that you can really give a clear message out to the public about who the children are in care, what their needs are, and what you're looking for in foster adoptive families. We have extensive other resources on the website, as I mentioned. All of these are available for free and can be downloaded. So I hope you'll look at these as ways to support your work in combination with the extensive resources on the National Adoption Month website. Kelly, back to you.
Thanks so much, Alicia. And just so you all know in the audience, Alicia and I, our contact information is included on the last slide of this PowerPoint. If you'd like to follow up with either of us about any of the resources that we mentioned, or if you have any questions for either of us. So now we will move to the Q&A session. So this is a chance for our audience to ask questions of any of the presenters you heard today. We already had a couple of questions come in. I'm actually going to ask Thomas and Ashley, if you don't mind. One question that came in for both of you is, what did your potential or identified adoptive parents do to make their homes welcoming and inclusive of your background and history? Thomas, if you feel comfortable and want to answer that first, and then we can ask Ashley the same question.
Okay. At the time, I was very close with my family. We actually knew my adoptive mom's son when we were in the 6th grade. It was my first year in foster care, and we kicked it off. We were just really, really, really good friends. And I think just that moment, of having my first friend and being comfortable with somebody that I was able to open up with, and maintaining that friendship for, all those years up until junior year. And then, junior year is when I asked, my adopted mom if she could adopt me. Having that consistency in the friendship and getting to the age of 17 where I knew that being adopted at this point was very slim because, at this point a lot of foster parents or homes looked at me as being, an adult. They didn't want to take in a child that old. So I figured that getting adopted by somebody that I had already had a, history and relationship with since I was in the 6th grade, and why not ask and take that risk to see if they would be willing to take me in, and they took me in, and that's pretty much how it's been from there.
Thanks, Thomas. What about you, Ashley? Would you like to share anything about what your adopted parents did to welcome you into their home and be inclusive of what your history and background is?
Yeah, sure. When I first moved in with my mom at the age of 15, she was basically very loving and opening. She opened up her home, and she didn't pressure me to always speak up to her and talk to her about my past. She gave that time, and she also, at the time, I was still contacting my bio mom, and she was very open to that. And at the time, it was a really difficult situation, and I appreciate her understanding that our relationship would have taken time. She also gave me the opportunity to decorate my own room. Like, she definitely made sure that I felt like it was my home. She didn't pressure it towards me, and we just built a really strong relationship by understanding both each other.
And just to follow up on that, Ashley, just another question that someone asked was the relationship with your biological mom. How was this discussed through the adoption process? And you don't need to answer it, but that was a question that came in, and I think people are curious about how to navigate those conversations when you were in touch with both.
Of course. My adoption was an open adoption. Well, it was a close adoption, I should say. And my social worker tried her best to find the perfect parent that was open to have that relationship with a youth that is contacting their bio family. And it definitely was an awkward conversation, but it was needed, and all three of us sat down and explained to one another our feelings about it, and we came to run down that, what if it doesn't work out, it was meant to be that way. And I have to say that I appreciate that my foster parents were also engaged in it as well, and my adopted parent was open to it, because at the time I was so young, I was like, oh yeah, I want to keep everyone in my heart and talk to everybody, not shut anybody out. And now that I look back into it, I wish that I put my attention more on my on my adopted mom more than my bio mom.
And then just having that open relationship, that open conversation, helped to, helped to define what those relationships were going to be. But that worked for you, is to have that open yet awkward conversation.
Yes.
Thanks to you both for answering that. This is actually a question that I think all of you could answer. But Ani, let's start with you, if you don't mind. What do you believe is the biggest fear that foster youth, especially that 14 to 21-year-old age range, believe or hold concerning adoption, and why? And the question goes on to say, what can all of us do to address this real and understandable fear?
So the most common thing about adoption, why all the youth in care don't want to be adopted, is because they don't want to reject their biological family. So then the conversation is had that it's not about rejecting or replacing your biological family, it's about adding on to your family. so your family is growing. I believe that we as a system, it has to be either or, when the concept that works the best is this and that, right? So you can have your biological family who loves you, and you can have this adoptive family. Another reason why I believe youth are afraid to get adopted is because of they have to put themselves out there to say, hey, which is really vulnerable to say, hey, I want to be adopted, you know? And I don't believe that, I think people are coming around now, but I don't think there's enough people coming around to say, wow, at 18 you want to be adopted. Wow, at 19 you want to be adopted. So to step forward is really scary. So they don't want to be rejected because they have been hurt in the past. But if we have the conversation with the youth to say, hey, who loves you, who do you feel safe, and invite that person to the class, then we put the pressure on the parent, and that's not necessarily the youth. The youth has to agree to move in, and we hold the parent who they move in the home with understands that they're making an unconditional commitment. Another thing is, another reason why I believe youth have such a hard time with adoption is because some youth, they were adopted and they returned into care. So the word adoption doesn't mean the same thing, right? So, but if we approach it, say, hey, how about, I just want to find, and this is what I tell those youth, I would like to find someone who's going to be unconditionally committed to you for a lifetime. And, I call it family, you call it friend, auntie, uncle, whatever you call it, that's what I'm looking for. And not necessarily put the pressure on a legal adoption until that youth is ready. But, all in all, that the person that we do find needs to be unconditionally committed to the child and needs to want to adopt the child and is willing to wait until that child can then say, hey, I'm ready and able and willing to be adopted.
Thanks, Ani. What about you, Stacy? Is there anything that you would add from your perspective about what you would consider one of the biggest fears that older have about adoption?
Yeah, I think knowing Jose and some of the other children that have been in our home, I think one of the biggest thing I would say is that they're living in the moment. And quite honestly, sometimes just getting from day to day is a challenge in itself. And thinking future and what might be out there is a bit much for them at this time. So when you're talking to them about, where do you see yourself and how about that forever family and what are you going to do when you're older and, you leave school for break and where are you going to go? They're not thinking about that per se at this time. They're thinking, okay, I've got to get through my class today, or I have therapy this afternoon and I need to get through that. So I think one of those things is just really starting that conversation and allowing them to forward think versus just being in the moment and giving them the time to do that.
Thanks, Stacy. I think that's really helpful. And I will ask Ashley and Thomas if there's anything that you think is one of the number one things that you think, because I think it's an important point, and that we talked about throughout the webinar, workers being able to address the fears and not being able to talk about them. So I'll ask you both as well. Is there something that you would say is the number one fear? Thomas, how about you go first?
I kind of see myself the past couple of years been, I guess, revisiting those fears, even after being adopted. My thing is that you get adopted and then, you go through that honeymoon stage where everything is fine, and then you have to, deal with the struggle of I've gone through so much before that, even if I'm adopted, I'm still fearful that, what about, because I've been rejected so much, what happens if this family decides to reject me? Who do I turn to? And that's been my fear. That's still my fear to this day. I don't know if that helps, but I just think it's the fear of just you've gone through so much. You've seen so much. You've been rejected. You've been hurt by so many. And now, you get adopted and you're like, I trust this home, but in the back of your head, it's like you're still fearful that what if this happens again? Who do I want to?
Thanks, Thomas. Anything you'd like to add to that, Ashley?
Yeah, like Thomas said, the biggest fear for me as well was being rejected, since I've been rejected by a lot of people in my life, and even my own bio mom and her bipolarism. And I constantly still ask my adopted mom now if she loves me at just random times, just because I want the reminder that I'm being loved and, you know.
That it is forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, you both. So one additional question that came in, Stacey, I'll turn it to you. What did you do to make your home welcoming to your adoptive son, and/or what needs to be considered in the process of adopting an older youth? We have about 4 more minutes, so, feel free to answer either one.
Okay, sorry, could you say the second one again?
Sure. What needs to be considered in the process of adopting an older youth?
I think there are lots of things to be considered, quite honestly. It's the needs that are in place and the care that's in place that they have now, and making sure that everybody is willing to continue that. Like Thomas said, it was very important for him to stay connected to his caseworker and maybe his therapist. Jose, to this day, let's see, he entered care at the age of 7, and he is still seeing his art therapist today, and he'll be 22 this week. So I think having that relationship and continuing those things and putting a value on them is very important as an adoptive parent, to understand what the youth needs coming in to the home and facilities. We had to do special tutoring and classes to get him to where he needed to be to really advance him to make sure he graduated on time. So I think it's looking at those things and understanding as an adoptive parents that, they do have issues, and you need to continue with those and really address them and help them get to where they want to be.
Great, thanks. There are a couple of questions that we weren't able to answer, so I want you to know that you can email. We'll have our contact information on the last slide, and you can email any additional questions that you might have. We are going to close out with a question to Ani that came in. The question is, how should professionals navigate a conversation about the possibility of not being adopted while staying positive? And that's how it was worded. So I was just wanting to pose it to you because I think that that's something that many workers ask, and just wondering how you would respond.
So really quickly, so when I have conversations with youth that don't want to be adopted, I say okay, and I ask them what do they want? How are they willing to work in partnership with me to proceed? Now, my goal, and I make it very clear, my goal is to make sure that I find someone who's going to be unconditionally committed to you. That's what I tell the youth. And when I'm having a conversation with people around them about the importance to be unconditionally committed to the youth, I'm letting them know, I would only proceed. This is the perspective, foster adoptive parents. I will only move forward with you if you're going to be unconditionally committed to this youth, because he or she is going to reject you for, and I will let them know whatever individual reasons they may have. My thing is, the parents need to be unconditionally committed. I don't put the pressure on the youth. That's a commitment that I feel, due to fear, due to trauma, due to everything else around them, that they are afraid to make. So if we as a system say, hey, parent, I need you to be unconditionally committed to this youth, regardless if he or she runs away or whatever behavior, then that is the key. So there's no pressure for the youth. We only ask the youth to move in. And if the child is refusing to get adopted, I would really want to find out why. What are your fears? What are your concerns? And really meet them where they are, to really listen to what the youth is trying to tell you. Listen beyond the words. Listen beyond the emotions. A lot of times when someone is screaming or yelling, we discount what they're saying, and I think we need to listen closely.
That's excellent, Ani, and a great note to close on. Thank you. Unfortunately, that concludes the time we have for this year's webinar. If you have any follow-up questions, please contact Child Welfare Information Gateway at info@childwelfare.gov or AdoptUSKids at info@adoptuskids.org. I want to extend a huge thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their expertise, passion, and experience with us today. And I want to thank our audience for joining us. I hope you found this webinar useful and inspiring. And with that, we'll finish. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.